Hello and welcome. In this video, I'll kind of just be documenting some of my recent experiments and explorations with some new tools that I recently discovered. And some of these things are looking really interesting, and I'm excited to see where these experiments lead into the future. So let's just jump right in and see what's going on here. So I begin by sketching out a really rough concept inside Krita, and you could use whatever other photo editor you prefer. But the idea is I'm creating a rough concept, and whatever concept I come up with inside Krita, I'm going to take this and plug it inside Stable Diffusion. And then I'll go through this kind of back and forth process between myself and the AI, just polishing and refining it with each step. And usually the final version looks really different from the initial, is still in there, and at the end of it you'll have something that's a lot more polished. So this workflow for me has been an eye-opener to the kind of leverage that these AI tools can really give you as an artist. Another interesting thing I've noticed while playing around with Stable Diffusion is that this tool has an interesting way of throwing curveballs at you while you're chasing a concept. Because it's almost like you're interacting with an external mind inside your computer. There's a way in which, just within the bounds of the image and the concept that you're working on, you can almost see it trying out different things in the different variations that it produces. And this has an interesting way of opening up new avenues of exploration as you're chasing a concept. But I also found that I needed to be careful so that I don't get carried away, because I can just find myself going farther and farther away from the initial thing that I was chasing. So that's just something else that I noticed while using Stable Diffusion. So this is the final concept that I kind of settled for. And from here, I'll use this as a solid base to refine going forward. So as much as I like these outputs, they look really cool and realistic, and you could probably continue pushing it in that direction. But my intention with this project was to take the final output and convert it into an SVG vector drawing that I could manipulate as code. And I'm just doing this by breaking the image into a few different parts. So I have the outlines, and then I have the shadows, and then I have the highlights, and then the background, which does most of the midtones. They're single objects, but they have a gradient as their fill. So this is just what I did in Inkscape. I took my concept from ComfyUI, brought them into Inkscape, and simplified it as a vector drawing. And this final vector drawing is what I'm going to take into this really cool thing that I discovered. So now is a good time to mention that there's an ongoing campaign in the Arweave ecosystem, and this project is my attempt at participating in the event. So these 4 platforms have come together in the Arweave ecosystem, and they're kind of fighting it out for some prize pool. So I'll be submitting in the bazaar, which is kind of like an NFT type marketplace on the Arweave network. And each week you have a prompt, and then artists can create their interpretation of that prompt and publish their artwork for that week. So this week's prompt is data art, and this is what prompted me to take that visual concept and turn it into an SVG drawing, because this format gives me access to the code, and I can manipulate this visual art as data. And that's kind of my interpretation of this prompt. This is Unit. In its own words, Unit is a general purpose visual programming system built for the future of interactivity. While that may sound like a mouthful of buzzwords, I think it's really cool once you see what this thing can really do. I suggest you go through the website and just see all of its features. And I just don't think there's anything like this out there. So this is the environment in which we'll be manipulating our SVG. But just to see the basics of what this thing can do, I'll come down here and search for, and in here you'll see all the different components that are available to you inside this system. So let's say you wanted to do some basic math. I'll search for add and add that there. So you have this kind of node here. And essentially, this tool gives you a node-based workflow for basically creating any type of program you could think of. So let's say I add a 1 here, and then I add a 4 here, and then on the other end you get your output, which is 5. And if I remove the output, you'll see the inputs disappear. But let's say I didn't want the inputs to disappear. Let's put there a 6 and a 4. I'm just going to turn this into constants by making that a dotted line. And if I now pull this out, you'll see we're just constantly generating 10s, which is, I think, is just really, really cool how it does this in a visual manner. Okay, so without getting too deeply lost into all these details, let's just jump in and see what we can do with SVG using Unit. So I'll delete this, and then I'll come down here and search SVG, and I have 3 components here, and I will add an SVG path. So I'm going to bring back my Inkscape, and then inside Inkscape you see I have all of these objects, all of these things that I'm drawing here, I'm drawing them as paths. And Inkscape has this really cool feature. There are these 2 windows that I've undocked from Inkscape. You can find them down here, and then you'll find this one, which is the XML editor, and this one, which is the selectors and CSS. So these 2 respectively. So I've just undocked them so that we can use them with Unit without having to jump back and forth between the 2 interfaces. So here you'll see if I select a path, the code that's displayed here will change. So if I select this, you'll see all the information related to this object. If I select this, you'll see all the information related to this object. So I'm just going to pull the Inkscape UI out of the way and remain with these 2. So if I still select an object in Inkscape, you'll see that the code here changes depending on the object. So what I want to do with a path selected, I have, say, the outline selected. You'll see here that we have the D. This is kind of the code of the path that we've drawn in Inkscape, which is rather long and complex. So I want to transfer my outline from Inkscape into the Unit UI, and with this SVG path component, you'll see it's asking for a style object and the D, which is the path, this right here. So I will select this D from Inkscape, Control A, and copy. So once that's copied, I will come into Unit, double click there, create a string. I'll add it as a string and then paste that in there. And then you'll see what we have. And I like that from Inkscape, the code is really, really long, but once we bring it into Unit, it just shrinks it nicely into something that doesn't make the UI look funky. So if I just remove that, you'll see it disappears, and if I plug that into there, we have a path. In our drawing, the path was black, but here it looks white, and that's because it's just giving it a default style, which we haven't supplied right here. So I'll probably do something like create a curly braces to add an object, and then I will say stroke. I want to remove the stroke, so I will say stroke none, and then add another one. I'm going to say fill. I want you to fill this with black, or maybe I'll give it the hexadecimal. Say FFF, and enter. And just like that, you see, we have the outline from our drawing inside Unit. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring in the rest of my SVG objects into the Unit interface, and then we can see how to put them all together and do some interesting things. So here I now have all of my different SVG objects inside Unit, and if I click this circle, it'll turn into a square and you'll find yourself in layout view. And here I can organize in what order I want these objects to be laid out. So for example, I know these two objects are the only ones with a fill without a transparency, so I don't want them blocking any of the other ones. So I want these here at the beginning. Then I'll bring the shadows, and then these three will be last. And then I'll go back into the graph view. So what we now want to do is find a way of taking all these several layers and bring them back to form a single coherent image. And before I continue, something else I'll do is I'll make sure to turn all these data inputs into constants. So just by holding F, I'll go into change mode, which is this blue mode, and then click on the arrow to turn into a dotted line, which shows that it's a constant, so that now the values will be saved. They try to stop me. That's power I harness. Get on my sinus. The way I move through the darkness. Yeah, I'm feeling godly. I'm feeling godly. I'm feeling godly. So with that done, I'm going to go into this box and search SVG. And I'm going to add a SVG component and an SVG text box. So I'll zoom out, hold shift, make sure to select everything including the SVG text box, and then I'll long press on the SVG component to just grab and throw everything in there. And we are seeing the layout is kind of weird, so I'll just go in there and then go into the layout view. And then in here, I'm just going to rearrange these objects again. So with that, you see the image appears as it should. And then we're going to do one last thing before we wrap this video up. I'll go in there and I want to select out this SVG text box. And also before that, I think there are a few layers in here that I want to disable for now. So if we now zoom out and look at the image again, you'll see that our character now has the eyes open. And I've set those three aside so that in future exercises, I can try and learn how to make this guy blink. But for now, we'll just settle for animating this text. So let's get in there, find the SVG text, get in there, and you'll see this is the thing that is displaying that text. So something I'd like to do is set this the X and Y parameters. Maybe I'll just tweak the X parameter and set this to say 15%. And then if we zoom out, I like the placement of this text right about there. Then let's get in here and see if we can just animate this text. So I'll come down here and add a constant, just something to hold our value, any value. So enter tempo, and so that this can also hold this string, I'm also going to turn this into a constant. So now we are constantly generating the string. I'm going to duplicate this and then change this to elephant. And I want to kind of create an animation where the text switches from the Swahili and the English translation of the word elephant. I'm going to come down here and add a switch AB. So it outputs A and B interchangeably forever. So if we plug this into the B value and plug this into the A value, so if we now remove this, you'll see it alternates between the two: elephant tempo, elephant tempo, elephant tempo, which is cool. So now, instead of having to manually do the switching, I want to kind of somehow integrate some functionality to automate that timing in some way. So there's a node here called wait. And so what this does is it waits for B before it outputs A. So it waits until there's a signal in B before it outputs A through here. So I'm going to set this to A. So now, and something cool about unit is where where there's a yellow, it's showing you where data is flowing, and where it's grayed out, it's showing you where there isn't really data flowing. So it's really good feedback that tells you the current state of your program. So I could use the wait, or I could use the delay. Let's use the wait. I'll come here and search for a timer. So if I set this to say 1 second, then made sure that's a constant. If I remove this, it's going to wait for that 1 second before it outputs again. And here you saw that our wait node, it waits until there's a signal here before it allows this signal to continue through. So we'll take this and plug this here. So now if I remove the tempo, it's going to wait for 1 second before it outputs the other input. And if I do the same, it's going to wait for 1 second before it outputs. So we've kind of added one level of control there. So if, say, we set this to 2 seconds, if I remove the tempo, it's going to wait 2 seconds, then give us the other one. Then just like that, again and again. So now we want to kind of have a way to automate the switching. So we've given it a timer, but we also want the switching to be automated. So there's a cool node here called debounce. So this one outputs only after a stream has stopped for the duration that you set in milliseconds. So it's kind of doing the opposite of what we are doing here. Here there's a signal coming in, and then we are telling it to wait for 2 seconds before the signal continues through. This node listens until it's been silent for the duration that you set here, and then it's going to allow the output to go through. So here I'm going to take this, plug it into A, and then I'm going to duplicate this timer, plug it into the milliseconds here, and I'm not going to change the duration, like that. And then you'll see that switching has kind of been automated. So while here we are telling the signal to wait for the 2 seconds, This one, we are telling it to listen until it's been silent for 2 seconds before it releases. And then in combination, these two kind of create this switching effect between elephant and tempo, elephant and tempo. And then this is what I'm going to take and plug it into the SVG text. So now if we zoom out into our image, we're going to see that functionality integrated automatically into the image. So I'm going to stop there for this video. I hope this kind of just shows you the field of possibilities that becomes possible with this kind of tool, and I just really like it. I think it's really fun to play around with this kind of 2D terminal. So I hope this was interesting. I hope you learned something from the video. Let me know if it was interesting. Let me know if you would like me to continue exploring and sharing this kind of stuff. So goodbye, and I will see you in the next one.
They try to stop me. That's power I harness. Get on my stardust. The way I move through the darkness. Yeah, I'm feeling godly. I'm feeling godly. I'm feeling